Guys, I don't know, it's kind of been all over the place. Vietnam has been a wild ride, so thank you for, I guess, coming here instead of going to party, which is amazing. So in case you guys don't know what this is, we are running one of our 20 Dencun meetups. So on March 13th, if you guys didn't know, Ethereum had a huge upgrade where we introduced blocks. I'll actually talk about that a little later in our presentation. But I'm just going to do a quick opening. What is Linea? What is Dencun? Why are you even hosting this event? So I'm going to dive into it. I see some familiar faces, so you're just going to see me present the same presentation I give every single time. But anyways, you can move to this slide, right? So what is Linea? You guys came here, hopefully you know what it is. But if not, I'll get into it. Linea is an EVM equivalent ZK rollup. We are bootstrapped by consensus, right? So what does that mean exactly? So we'll start off with rollups, right? So rollups are scaling solutions. Basically, you can imagine right now, Ethereum is very slow. You go one transaction to Ethereum, one transaction to Ethereum, one transaction to Ethereum. That's not scalable. So that's where rollups come in. Basically say, hey, let's do a whole bunch of them. Roll it all up and post it back once to Ethereum, right? And so what that actually means, right, is when we post that data back to Ethereum, we actually have to prove whether or not it's correct. So when people ask me, okay, let's talk about Linea within this landscape of L2s, there's a variety, right? So we start off with optimistic rollups, right? So in this case, when we post our data back to Ethereum, the rollups, you just assume that they're true, right? We wait 7 days actually for something called fraud proofs to be submitted. And if nothing is submitted or one is submitted and it turns out to be true, that's when it comes in. Optimistic rollups were the first iteration of what rollups look like out there. If you're familiar, we have like Optimism, we have Arbitrum, Base, etc. right? So obviously, like, this is really great. We need scaling in Ethereum, but this is a bit less secure. The challenge period reduces like the liquidity, right? So ZK rollups is kind of where we get into the next phase of things. And this is where Linea sits specifically, right? So instead of saying, hey, let's use fraud proofs, let's actually use math to prove it. So we use something called ZK proofs. In this case, and I always say this as part of a PSA, right? Linea is not a privacy solution. People often associate ZK proofs with privacy, which is true because they don't have the property of having to reveal all the information. With ZK rollups actually though, what we do is ZK rollups reveal, when we post the data back to Ethereum, we also have to post that proof back to Ethereum. So that's where we incur all the costs. So we need to make that proof as small as possible. And it just so happens ZK proofs are the smallest type of proof you can mathematically prove, making things cheaper, right? So, and also because we're using math and not waiting on a community to kind of submit a fraud proof, we have instant or near instant finality as opposed to like 7 days. So now the next question is like, okay, Emily, optimistic versus ZK, can you tell me a little bit about, what about all the different ZK rollups, right? And so this is where we actually get into the different types of implementations. So there are actually 4 types of ZK EVMs at the highest level. How many of us are developers in this room? Okay, only a handful, so not that many. But what you can basically think of this as, maybe at a very high level, type 4 is the most different from Ethereum. Type 2, type 1 is the most similar. So for developers, what that means exactly is when I am building on Ethereum and I build on a type 4 type of ZK rollup, the types of tools that I use, the code that I write is a little bit different, right? But with a type 2, type 1, nothing changes. Like basically building a project on Linea feels exactly the same as building a project on Ethereum. So what you get then is the network effects of all the existing projects that are already on Ethereum and making it very easy to port over onto Linea. So I will just skip over this slide, but if you are kind of interested in what the different types look like, StarkNet, ZK Sync are the most different, I guess, Linea and Scroll is kind of where we sit. But we're not all technical here, so we can move on. The thing I want to say really, at the core of it, what Linea has 2 values. I think number 1 is security. So by that measure, right, we're a ZK rollup, we're secured by math. If you're interested, right, the difference, one of the key differences I think with a type 2 versus a type 4 is because it is the most similar, you have the least amount of overhead in terms of thinking about like security auditing. So if we're talking about auditing something like how many of you guys are familiar with the Curve Finance hack? Kind of, right? Okay, so Curve Finance got hacked, right? Why did they get hacked? It's because their smart contracts were written in Viper, right? So Viper is a language. Viper itself, the language itself, had a compiler bug, but the smart contracts themselves would not have revealed the compiler bug. So if you take that same paradigm and apply it to rollups, right? The Solidity code you might write for a type 4 could have 0 bugs. But once we dive into the opcodes and the bytecode and kind of the lower level stuff, it's a little different. So you might not have a function that's covered. You might unexpectedly have like funds locked or something like that. So I think actually being a type 1, type 2 is also a security thing. And the other thing that actually no other L2 is, we are the only multi-client L2, which is kind of super important for decentralization. But anyway.